Hello, everyone. How's it going on? How's it hanging? Is the Erdtree hanging low? Hello, Andrew. Nice to see you again. It should be fun. I think I watched that critique before. We'll see. We'll see. I read a couple of the top comments, and they seem like, oh, an opinion on the DLC, which is kind of telling, considering that a lot of the opinions I've seen on the DLC with people that would comment something like that, the people that give those opinions are usually the ones that I tend to agree with at this point, just because frankly, I think this DLC has pushed From Software into absurdity. But we'll get into that. I'm sure we will. But couple things before we get into this video itself. I no more gaming on ESAS. Just my internet cannot be improved anymore, and I've already had stutter issues, so I'm just gonna keep gaming stuff on the gaming channel. ESAS will be just for reacting and talking about stuff. So if you enjoyed that, I apologize. No more streaming games, just because my internet can't be upgraded any more than it already is. So I apologize for that. But another thing is I'm not going to finish this video today. I don't think I'll have enough time. If I do, great. But expect this to be sort of broken up to some degree. Like if we get to around this sort of like midway point, around after about maybe 2 hours or so of the stream, I'm probably going to stop the stream early and then we tackle the other half later on, because I don't want to get through like 70% of the video and then go to the last part. But yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to get into Joseph Anderson's Phase 2 Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree critique. Should be fun. Yeah, seeing that. Gutted but understandable. Guess we'll just need to react to your Sekiro journey if you continue it. I'm probably going to restart the Sekiro run and put that on the gaming channel. The only issue is I'm trying to tackle games in sort of franchise order. So right now I'm trying to wrap up the Borderlands series of games, and then after that Sekiro might come, but it will eventually happen. It will eventually happen on it'll eventually happen. I promise. Anyway, so let's get into this here video and see what old Joe has to say about the Elden Ring DLC.
Hello, Elden Ring fans. It's me, Satan. A couple weeks ago, I was doing what I normally do every night, counting all the millions of dollars in ad revenue that my Elden Ring air quotes critique made. Usually, by the time I'm done, YouTube has sent over the next helicopter full of money and I get to start all over again. It's how I spend most of my time these days, sitting in front of my computer with 3 monitors on, not working on the Witcher 3 video. The central one has the Elden Ring critique on repeat 24/7 because I love hearing the sound of my own voice. The second has the comments updating in real time so I can always see what people are saying about it. And the third are the daily stream of emails I receive from Miyazaki himself begging me to take the video down because it's ruining Game of the Year 2022's reputation. Anyway, I was about to zip up for the night when a new batch of comments came in. Apparently, the game was being patched and they were adding Torrent to the Elden Beast fight. Even though I wasn't the only one to say that the horse felt missing from that boss, I still took full immediate credit for it and just know it's because every single person at FromSoft has watched my video multiple times, crying, "You're welcome. This change was coming as part of an expansion that was about to be released, and I had no idea about this. I only played Elden Ring so I could make a video on it for clout because it was the hot popular game at the time. I had no plans on even playing Shadow of the Erdtree and hadn't even heard of it, but then the comments changed for a second time."
See, this is the thing, right? Like I'm having a little trouble discerning like how much of this is a joke and how much of this is genuine, because some of the comments he's made about like watching his videos on repeat and reading the comments and getting emails about how his video touched everybody in the community all the way up to the developers and stuff, that seems like a joke, right? That seems like a joke. But then he's talking about like actual interactions with people about the DLC and about other things that like it's kind of sending mixed messages to me about like what he's actually trying to get across with this sort of introduction. So I guess we'll see where it goes. This is a long introduction, by the way. This is like 11 and a half minutes of an introduction, which I don't understand why you'd have an introduction that long unless you just didn't want to make like a subsection for some of the stuff you talk about. But either way, let's keep going.
Turns out I was right all along. Again, As I always am, the boss design of the DLC had only made things worse from the approach they had taken in the first game. People were miserable. Fights were too hard, too unreadable, too unreactable, and Joseph Anderson was prophetic and correct, and the video aged like wine and stands the test of time, and so on. I'd say it's my favorite feeling, but it happens so often that I'm mostly used to it by now. Mostly. So I sipped on Twitter in celebration and thought that'd be the end of it. For the first time in my life, I was wrong. The comments kept coming, then emails, then Twitter DMs, Reddit DMs, the worst kind. People started stopping me in the street to tell me how right I was and that they were sorry they hadn't seen how bad it had gotten. My kids keep asking me why so many people want to shake my hand, and so I decided I had to see for myself before From had a chance to patch the game out of the mess they had made. I wanted the raw, horrifically awful base experience of Shadow of the Erdtree, not
Again, I'm having I'm having trouble. Like, is this all a meme? Like, is this meme going to end at some point? And then we're going to get some actual criticism of the game, apart from just, again, it's that thing of tone, right? Like when he goes into these like memes and jokes and stuff, he just kind of he has the same delivery for jokes as he does genuine criticism and genuine points. So it ends up becoming a problem where it's like, okay, when does the meme end and when does your actual criticism or commentary like begin? And I'm having confusing thoughts on this as we sort of go through this. Anyway, let's hope he gets to. Looks like he's actually going to get to it now. So let's see what he says.
not for my own enjoyment, because let's be real, I don't enjoy anything about these games, and I never have, and not even to make a video. I just wanted to bask in the warm glory of being right. So I downloaded the expansion and
Okay, it just came to me. I think the reason he's writing this video like this is because he's probably gotten comments by people saying he's grifting off of the hate towards the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. And I feel like that's what he's playing off of, and this will turn into a proper video after he's done sort of his joke thing. It's kind of similar to the beginning of Mahler's defense of Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin video, where the first, I forget how long it is, I think it's 4 or 5 minutes, where he treats the game as if he is praising it nonstop and all that stuff. And then it fades to black, and then he comes back in, and then he goes over the problems with the game for the next hour and a half. Right? So I feel like this is similar to what Joseph is doing, or what Joseph is doing is similar to that, where he's starting off with sort of a meme of what he thinks people think of him, and then he's going to get into an actual thing that deals with what he's talking about, which I don't mind, but at the same time, it's kind of a turn off watching a video like that when a meme kind of goes on for several minutes. But maybe that's just me.
Plug my Ethernet cord so that day one train wreck could live on for my whole playthrough, crashing over and over. Having finished the DLC now, I can objectively say that FromSoft has hit a new low, and they were already pretty far down, so this is like breaking into Ash Lake after thinking the boss design Blighttown was rock bottom in the base game. How I long for that FromSoft to return now, because what we have to tolerate today is a shadow of its former self. I'd say they've lost the plot. If their games had any, they've painted themselves into a corner now since deciding they live in a world without criticism. The DLC's design is soulless and hollow, the series has been wrung out, and whoever is in charge is an old king overdue to be put out to field. But they won't. They'll stick around until all the blood is bored out of the fans, too afraid to speak up, and will inevitably die twice. Once now, as the actually astute among us notice the decline and will be ignored, and a second time when you all finally catch up to us and realize that this was the moment of downfall. And if you had only been brave enough to admit to some shortcomings, then things could have been different. But
This is one weird thing is like I didn't watch any trailers and stuff for the DLC. Like, but like I didn't watch any of these cinematic trailers for the DLC, so it's weird seeing those clips and be like, oh, that looks neat. But then I was like, oh yeah, it's a high budget game cinematic trailer. Of course, it's going to look interesting. A lot of the games only sell based on those things.
now there's only ashes left to watch blow away. Demon Souls, I didn't want to make this video, but I can't resist rubbing it in. I will now proceed to relentlessly complain about every single thing wrong in this DLC, which is a lot, for the next 70 minutes. I will also provide the easily impressionable masses with the correct opinion, my opinion, which will from this day forward be parroted on every message board as fact about this game's quality, and in 100 other videos, all with a variant of broken masterpiece in the title, just to annoy you specifically. And this is your fault, because I warned you, if you try to block me, you can only make me stronger. Father Geralt, forgive me. This is phase 2.
Okay. I guess we're getting to the actual content in the video now. Now the meme of I'm turning against the fandom joke is kind of done. What is this music? Snow masterpiece, even more shattered masterpiece, ground to dust masterpiece. Okay, so these are just... He's just cranking these memes out right now.
All right, so that should have gone on long enough to scare off the type of people it was making fun of. Let's begin for real. Spoiler.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, this is what I figured he was doing.
For Elden Ring and all of the DLC, of course. 2 years ago, I made that critique video, and it was probably the best received of the big ones that I've ever done. You know, the videos where I give credit to the big latest release for being great, but also don't shy away from a good chunk of what I think is legitimate criticism, like Breath of the Wild, God of War, Mario Odyssey. Usually this type of content triggers a big backlash counterattack, even though it wasn't my intention to attack anything or anybody. But I get it. Truly, I can come across as really negative sometimes, often more than I actually am, and people love their video games. I do too. We're passionate. It's fine. The Elden Ring critique wasn't like that. It followed an inversion of the usual response. Most people today are more willing to admit the shortcomings in Breath of the Wild and Odyssey, for example, whereas they were frothingly adamant that the games were flawless at release. Meanwhile, most people agreed with my Elden Ring video when it came out. Gonna get a bunch of comments about that, but I'm sorry, it's true. They really did. It got a lot of support, but over time, some of them have returned to say they no longer do so. Said another way, the fan base at large seemed to agree with most of my criticism near release, and a significant portion of them have since gradually shifted conclusions to that the problems they thought were in the game aren't that big of a deal anymore, or don't exist at all and never did, and they had to play the game some more to figure it out, or are the players' faults, or maybe even my fault, not the game's.
Yeah, this is one thing. Is like I feel like there's one problem with this series as it's kind of gone on, which I think is something that he's sort of alluding to, but not saying directly. Is the more complicated the games become, and the more, let's say, intricate, just to be sort of neutral, the more intricate that the challenges become, the harder they become, and the more people get pushed away because of the level of difficulty rising, right? And I think that's part of the problem with Elden Ring in general, is that the difficulty is now getting to a point where certain people don't want to play the games anymore. I am one of them. All right, I'm spoiling my Elden Ring video that I'm working on, but my biggest problem with Elden Ring is the difficulty. That's my personal biggest problem, right? The video is going to go over different things, but pretty much what a lot of the points he made in his Elden Ring video, I did end up agreeing with, because there are significant problems with the way the game is balanced, with the way the game deals with its bosses, how it uses assets, how it repeats assets all the time, as well as just the way it balances different builds to the difficulty of specific situations. And it's been a significant problem for Elden Ring during the entirety of its existence that the game is blatantly unbalanced, and I don't think the devs know a way to balance it properly. And the DLC is a good example of that as well, because there's a lot of stuff in the DLC that just feels like, how are you supposed to survive this? Like, there are so many moments in the DLC where you will just get destroyed by something because the devs have just cranked the damage meter all the way up, right? There are several times in my playthroughs where I have been KO'd just by a single attack, and it's not from one individual boss. I've been spammed to death by combos that just obliterate me. I've been one-shot killed by different boss moves. It's incredibly frustrating when the entire aspect of your RPG mechanics, including the Erdtree fragment stuff, your levels, your armor, your health pool, your defenses, your resistances, and stuff like that, when all of that stuff basically gets negated because the boss hits like a truck on fire covered in dynamite, you're going to end up getting some criticism, as a from like a player perspective, and you're going to have people that don't want to be a part of this anymore if this is where the difficulty is going. If the difficulty is going to be as one note as a lot of old arcade games were, where you just have lives, and once you run out of lives, that's it, restart. If we're going to get back to that sort of level of difficulty where it's just when this move, if you miss this move, if you mistime this, you're just dead. Like there's no recovery. If you are just dead after certain moves, I think plenty of people are going to jump ship, with myself being one of them. And again, I'm going to go over some of this stuff a lot more in the Elden Ring video that I am working on, but that will have to wait because that's not in the upload schedule right now. So we're going to see how long it takes to get through that.
My first video, like most things that are created, has a few mistakes in it. I'm going to talk more about them and the response it has gotten toward the end of this one, but considering how infamous that critique has become in some circles, it didn't feel right to begin here without acknowledging that. The fake intro also wasn't a complete lie because I really wasn't going to play this expansion at release until the torrent change news exposed me to so many comments complaining about the DLC's boss design and how much From had doubled down on all of the issues I had pointed out in the base game. In fact, I haven't played a proper video game since December, I think. It piqued my curiosity too much to ignore, and then I really did want to play the initial launch version of these fights to see what all the fuss was about after that. And this is where things might get a touch awkward because I know exactly what some people are expecting from me here. Validation about those issues, biting criticism about how the fights are too hard and have strayed too far from the fundamentals of punishing but always fair, in an attempt to still provide a difficult, rewarding experience to a player base that has an incredible amount of banked mastery and improvement by now, gained from the previous games that are like this: Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Souls-like imitators, and so on. Sorry, you know what I'm talking about if you're still listening. This is a waste of time. It really pains me to do this. The FromSoft player base has become the absolute worst fan group in video games since the release of Elden Ring. Just the most incessantly obnoxious group of people that feel like they're defending an insulted family member when you say the slightest word wrong in the proximity of their beloved video game. They speak.
This is the one thing I wouldn't call this the most like defensive fan base out there, like in terms of how the Finns try to defend things that have clear problems, but I would agree that people in this fan base have sort of their sacred cow game, and they can't fathom the criticisms of said sacred cow. You know, like you know, I try to treat all the games evenly. Dealing with like criticisms and things like that. It's also a thing too where I came into this franchise late, right? Like I didn't play any of the Dark Souls games until after all of them had come out. I didn't play Sekiro when it came out. I didn't play. I played Elden Ring a little after it came out, or I say a little, but like I played it a little time after the game came out, right? And it's one of those things where, as I've gone through this community and as I've seen different people's comments and things like that, there does seem to be a large portion of the content of the fan base that seems to obsess over the difficulty angle. They obsess over like they seem like the fans that are truly masochistic, as opposed to fans that want a challenge. And that's the way I'll word it, because I've seen several people that when your argument boils down to just get good over and over and over and over and over and over, that just tells me that you're not here for the discussion. You just think that I'm bad at the game and don't expect me to play it the same way you do. And that's become a bigger problem in the series as it's gone on, right? And I worry for From Software in the future, because Elden Ring was their highest selling game, right? I think ever. I think at this point it's sold like 25 million copies or something. Like it's a crazy success. But that crazy success, I think, is starting to come with a cost, because there's a lot of people showing their disdain for the DLC, for the game in general, as Joseph Anderson's video, displayed, as well as the comments and stuff around his videos and other people's critiques of the game. There is a growing divide in the fandom between those that are still thinking From Software is making revolutionary, interesting, and difficulty-based, engaging games, whereas others are simply saying it's just getting to be too much. It's getting to be too much, and I am very much in the camp of it's just getting to be too much. And I think that's probably the biggest problem with this series of games in general is that all the games that have the absurd difficulty, right, the unfair difficulty, the extreme difficulty, are the ones that a lot of people review very highly, right? And it seems to be a recurring problem in this series where a lot of people go in expecting things to be unfair and then think that when we say things should be fair for difficult, that we're talking about something that's not real in this series, right? Like Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, Demon Souls, the better parts of Dark Souls 2, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, all of these games thrive on the difficult but fair angle. And that is something that I think is getting lost on the developers of From Software. They're just making things more tedious. They're making things more difficult. They're just arbitrarily scaling things up. And I think the scatter tree fragments are a perfect example of where we're headed, right? The skippy tree fragments, as I've affectionately called them, all they do is boost your damage by a little bit and boost your damage negation by a little bit. That's all they do. They don't give you new abilities. They don't do anything. They are just an arbitrary number shift that benefits you. That's all it is. And even with them, the bosses still hit like a flaming truck with just covered in dynamite. Right? It is a thing where they have created a solution to a problem that doesn't actually solve anything dealing with the problem itself. And he's going to get to this, I think, in this one section with the Scadu world design. So, but I just want to make that very clear right now. Is just it seems like Elden Ring has been sort of the dividing point, or has been a dividing point amongst fans. Dark Souls 2 was kind of the first game to have that dividing point. Just based on sort of like how difficulty and fairness are handled. But I feel like Elden Ring has sent that argument into the stratosphere, and tons of people are now going to be split on whether Elden Ring is fun and fair or fun and just crazy, right? And I think that they're going to start being two sort of subsections within the fandom that are going to differentiate the games based on how difficult they are. Or one of them is going to differentiate the games based on how difficult they are, and the other is going to differentiate them based on how fair they are. And I feel like that divide's going to grow over time unless they make a shift after the DLC of Elden Ring. But we'll see. Anyway, getting back to this video.
Like a Pokemon named Get Good that evolves into a skill issue, so I know full well how much shit I'm going to get for this in the long term, but I have enough history with these games that I feel compelled to do it anyway. I feel like I owe it in some way since this series is what I launched my channel with. I loved Shadow of the Erdtree. I think it's a big step in the right direction from vanilla Elden Ring and has been a huge relief for me to go through. While there is undoubtedly some unfairness in some of the fights and many problems in the exploration and the world, I had a blast overall, and I was sad when it ended. Dare I say it, I had a yabba dabba do time, and I wouldn't be bothering to make this video right now if I hadn't. I think this is the best DLC FromSoft has made, because Sekiro didn't get one. Now, having made that
There's that thing, right? Everything I just said, I feel like he's going to step on because some of the comments I've seen about this video, not on this video, but made about this video, are that he essentially reverses course on a lot of the criticisms of Elden Ring, which are basically antithetical to the way I perceive the DLC, and a lot of others perceive the DLC as in the DLC is pushing things too far. It's not an improvement. It just pushes things to their absolute limit, and in many cases breaks the limit and just goes into this is just crazy. This is just crazy. How am I supposed to deal with this territory? And this is the thing that I think is going to be interesting about covering this video is that it sounds like he's going to praise a lot of things that we're going to end up criticizing. So let's get into it.
That comparison with the DLC from the other games, I must rush to point out the price difference. 40 USD is a steal for this in my opinion, but it is still so much more than the previous DLC packs and closer to a full price game. So it's a little rough to compare. The best one to put next to it is, unexpectedly, all 3 of the individual editions Dark Souls 2 got viewed as a combined package. Next would be doing the same for the Duo DLC that Dark Souls 3 received. Even when doing that, I still think Shadow of the Erdtree comes out on top. If Old Hunters or Artorias of the Abyss were twice as big and twice as expensive and kept the quality up the whole entire time, then maybe that wouldn't be true. Yeah, sorry, I wonder if it's a new group of people that hate me now. How dare I? So does that mean the Shattered Masterpiece has been repaired, reforged? It crushed a rune arc. Take down all those YouTube videos with all those titles. Am I back on the Elden Ring train? Choo choo. What about my thoughts on the base game? Well, it's a bit complicated. I don't think it's true that I have mixed feelings on most of these games anymore. My view has matured to being strongly positive, with some clear flaws that I know exist and wish weren't there, but I still adore the games. For example, Dark Souls 1 is an amazing work of art and one of my favorite games of all time, but everything after Big ONS makes me want to quit, and I have and do quit at that exact spot on so many playthroughs. The DLC can become an alternate.
That just seems like a that just seems like a you problem where you just don't want to deal with. It seems like he said that just because he doesn't want to deal with the gimmicks of the second half of the game. It seems like, again, I haven't seen why he feels that way, but just it comes off as I just don't want to deal with the gimmicks of the later
End
bosses.
path for that game since the quality is so high, and eerily, I wonder if that's what's going to happen to Elden Ring for me from now on. However, there are other problems that are on this level that I want to get into, but I also want to try my best to avoid the whole, oh my god, best game ever, here are 20 reasons why it sucks script style that I can fall into. And having finished the script now, and I'm recording this part much later, I feel like I kind of fell into that trap again, but let's let it ride and see what happens. I played the entire base game again on a fresh character for Shadow of the Erdtree. Even though it's not my favorite, I went with the double Colossal Sword build because the slow weapon speed was an issue I had before, and I thought it would be a good test to use that same approach in the DLC. So no summons, no magic, no ash spirits, just me, my weapons, and the boss. Those weapons had also apparently been buffed a few times, in particular for recovery times after swinging them since I last played, and I wanted to see how that felt. It took me about 50 hours to go through all of the base game zones, side dungeons, legacy dungeons, and bosses. I tried to sort of emulate a blind first playthrough and did most of the content again. I didn't do any grinding. In fact, I got a little impatient and ran through a couple of zones toward the end, and I was level 158 when I got to the new content. This feels about right since you can't access it without getting too near the end of the game. It took me 40 hours to beat the DLC, 5 hours of which were spent just on the final boss, which means he takes the crown as the longest I've ever spent trying to beat a fight in one of these games. It also means the DLC all on its own is comparable in length to some full release Souls likes, and that's pretty awesome. I don't know if this is going to be worthwhile, but here's the path I took in the DLC as a reference, since it's so non-linear and can be approached in many different ways. That's Elden Ring for you. Hopefully, it's interesting at least, and if you don't think so, you can just skip to the next chapter in the timeline below. I explored the starting area a little bit, killed the first furnace golem, and then went straight into the legacy dungeon Belarus. I didn't intend to stay long, but I ended up getting sucked into completing it right then. I was at Scadu Fragment level 2 and killed the dancing lion in a little under half an hour. I found it quite difficult. Afterwards, I finished exploring the starting area, did my first side content in a jail and side dungeon, and crossed the bridge toward Castle Ensis. I decided to keep exploring, however, and went down the other roads first. I found the alternative way to.
Just as kind of an FYI, I don't think I'm going to say much during this DLC run summary, just because I imagine it's going to be largely just how he took the challenge as it went, not really the criticisms of said challenge. So if I'm silent for the next 7 minutes, that's why. I don't think I'm going to have much to add because this is just him saying I ran the DLC this way, and that's pretty much it.
Scadu Altus through the Spirit Springs, landing you in a different castle. I killed the mini boss there and found the route to the new zone, but I felt like I had skipped too much of the earlier areas to push into this one, and I didn't want a repeat of what happened to me in base Elden Ring, so I went back to Gravesite Plain. This play session ended with me finding Egon on the ground, cursing some other guy named Bale. How curious. That joke doesn't make sense because that's from the Witcher 3 script. Although he won't give you any specifics about how long it's been. How curious. Non-linear joke, enjoy. Next up was a spot of Civil War when I had to kill a fellow old dragon man and found my way, surprisingly through a side dungeon, at a new zone, Jagged Peak. There were a few dragons to kill here, although I skipped Senesax because fuck that noise, and a thrilling horseback mountain climb to Bale.
Okay, so he's going to throw in little criticisms like that, and it's like, yeah, fuck that dragon fight. Fuck that last dragon fight. Just holy shit, man. Talk about lightning AoE spam. I mean, holy shit, man. Lightning AoE spam in an environment where your character is going to take increased electric damage. It's like, holy shit, developers. Why don't you just give us a boss that just is a giant dildo that slaps us every time we hit the dodge key? Why not? Why not at this point?
Who turns out to also be a dragon. I was Scooby Snack level 5 and tried for over an hour to kill him until this happened to me. Twice. This combined with my damage feeling a bit.
Yeah, those things are absurd. That little the fire tracking on Bale is very bad. It's very bad. Even after patches, like his fire breath is still really bad for just tracking the player. And at that point, it's obvious that the developers have coded the attacks to track the player. Like it's no longer about players in proper position use attack. It's like no, attack will find player, attack will follow player. You know, it's no longer about positioning as much as this is the attack that is going to chase you, deal with it. That's one of the problems with the DLC.
Low annoyed me enough to make like I was at Tim Hortons and roll up the rim out of there. I did try some of the new Colossal Katana weapons for a bit here though, and thought they were fun too. I was now obsessed with finding the map stone just to the north of this area, so I kept exploring and couldn't find it. I ended up in Cerulean and Charos, finding a sealed doorway at the bottom of a deep chasm, riding through the finger ruins down here, which were a big disappointment, thumbs down from me, and then returned to Gravesite Plain to mop up some points of interest before finally heading into Castle Ensis proper.
There's the one thing. Does I wonder about this? Does he know about the boss in the finger areas? How you're supposed to go to one finger area, interact with a thing, then go to another finger area, interact with a thing, and then a final finger area leads you to a boss? Does he know that? Again, I've not seen this video, so I don't know. I don't know if he missed that or not. That is probably one of the most missable bosses in the game, or not in the game, but in the DLC. Um, I just wonder if he will cover it at some point.
I was Scadoo level 6 for Rolana, and again it was a pretty difficult boss that took just under half an hour like the lion. Scadoo Altus was next, and I did a pretty half-assed circuit of exploration, including a detour to the ancient ruins of Ra'a via the imbued sword key teleporter before my first foray into Shadow Keep. I was Scadoo 7 for Golden Hippo, and it only took a couple of attempts, probably because I had already fought one as a roaming mini-boss in the southern part of the map. If you played the game, then you know Shadowkeep is quite a large area with many sublocations. I went through the courtyard-like bit after the hippo fight and found the secret way out to the flooded subzone of Altus. I followed this mostly linear path for 2 more hippo kills and a lengthy catacombs-type dungeon that surprisingly ended with a meatier-than-usual boss named Jory. The Abyssal Woods is gated behind this fight, unless there's another way here that I didn't find, and that was an even bigger surprise. I went through a bit of it right then and finally got the map stone I couldn't reach before. I wanted to unveil the entire map now, so I went back to Shadowkeep and took the westward route through a dungeon wing and across a bridge to the ancient ruins of Ra'a. I ended up clearing most of this zone looking for a way to the map pillar thing and not finding it. My skedaddle power reached double digits here, being 11 for the boss Ramana of the Bud, dude, and this was the only main fight of the DLC that I killed on my first try. For some reason after this, I gave up on my Mapstone quest and went back to the Abyssal Woods. I reached Midra's Manse shortly thereafter and spent 40 minutes fighting Midra himself before finally winning, which is weird because I think the Lion and Rolana are way more difficult than him. I must have kept getting caught out by some of his damaging spells, I guess, or something like that. I was still tree power 11 for this boss. In between this play session and the next, one of the creaky wheels in my head finally squeaked out a thought, and I wondered if the broken seal in that weird message that appeared when I approached Shadow Keep was referring to the door in the chasm I found earlier in the Cerulean coast. This turned out to be correct. It was a surprise to me too, so I did that literal dungeon dive next. My Scadoo amp still went to 11 for the boss here, but I began to wonder about the balancing implications of it when I absolutely melted the Putrescent Knight on my 4th attempt. I liked this boss a lot more when I fought it a second time with just a longsword and got to see its mechanics. I returned to Cerulean next to explore it more thoroughly, and then did the same for Scadoo Altus right after. I did some side dungeons and found a path through a cave that led to the land at the base of Ra'a and where the Trolley Mapstone was located. With the map finally complete, I first admired the big tree at the top of it, it looks gorgeous, and then spent half an hour bamboozled into hitting every wall around this elevated township, and trying every angle to double jump over with torrents because a message nearby was telling me there had to be a way in somehow. I finally did get in, only to immediately, and I do mean immediately, find the hole in the wall I was meant to use when I landed on the other side. I regretted not streaming my playthrough in this moment. Sorry, chat. Would have been a good clip. A quick teleport later, fully exploring Shadowkeep was finally happening. Or so I thought, because it had a whole other entrance and area I hadn't found yet, so I spent a ton of time trying to figure out how to get to this ladder before giving up. I even found a glitch in an invisible wall that stops you from getting through here, even if you can make the jump. Good job there, From. By the time I got to Mesmer, I was Shadow Blessing 15, but was still embraced in his flame for 35 minutes. Quite difficult. This was my second favorite fight of the DLC. I wonder if everyone knows what my favorite fight is now, having just said that. Somehow I missed one of the gaping holes in that ruined village in Altus, so I spent more time than I care to admit trying to find the way down to this area of the map before noticing this well with a ladder and thinking, well, there must be a tunnel, and stumbling on the way forward nearby. I rode through this area, couldn't be bothered killing the armored leg furnace golem again, met the Finger Ruins guy at the church, and found the second entrance into Shadow Keep, with a new Londo Ruins watery twist. There's a lot of back and forth between areas from this point on, and this was the last major bit of exploration that happened, so I'll conclude with the final fights with bosses in quick succession.
Okay, so again, not saying much just because this is him saying, "This is how I did the run." Here you go. I mean, I do find it kind of funny how certain bosses can be sort of blitzed on their first playthrough. Like my playthrough's up in the archive for these streams, and I beat the whole. Well, I didn't beat the entire DLC, but I think I beat all the major bosses within, I think, 20 hours, something like that. Might be wrong about that. Like 15. It took me 5 parts, and they're roughly like 3 to 4 hours a piece. So like, I wonder if there's like an element to the way he plays games where he just likes to go back and retread old ground just to see if new things happen. You know, because I genuinely wonder about that because this is kind of a little side rant. During the recordings for the Elden Ring video I'm making, a lot of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC stuff, the time that it took me to complete it and to get through all the different areas I'd reached, the time started to dwindle down the more I played the game. And for context, I've played through Elden Ring and Shadow of the DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree DLC 10 times for footage for the video I'm working on, right? So I'm very aware of what's in the DLC. Um, hey sheep, how's it going? But yeah, just as I've gone through the game and the DLC, the time it took me to complete the game and DLC started to go down, right? And I have a little reference sheet. So for my tank run, between a run that was natural and a run that was informed, the total run time ended up being about 75 hours, right? My sorcery run was about 60 hours. My incantation run was about 60 hours. My arcane run was a little over 30 hours. And my glass cannon run was a little under 30 hours, right? So over time I got good and gooder and gooder. So here we are. I'm glad you're feeling good, sheep. Glad to have you here. But my main point is I wonder how he tackles video games because I've often asked questions about some of the creators I've covered where it's like, how do you play games? Like it makes me wonder how they play games. But hopefully he's getting into some bosses now, and it looks like he does. Yeah, he does fight the finger lady, whatever she is, whatever it is. Anyway, once we get this to the world design, we can probably actually start talking about more stuff in the video rather than me just ranting about other things.
I was still Scato 15 for Commander Gaius and killed him the first time I managed to dodge his stupid charge at the start of the fight, which was my fourth attempt, so only a few minutes were spent here. You get 5 fragments for beating Gaius, so I was DLC level 17 for Scato Tree Avatar. This took me way longer at almost half an hour. I met Meteor shortly after this and got a very sloppy kill in under 10 minutes. Probably didn't deserve this one, but I didn't like the fight that much, so I don't care. Much to my dismay looking back, I had forgotten about Bale and Dre and thought that burning Mesmer's kindling for the final stretch was all I had left. So I did that, exploring a few side areas I had missed in Ra'a while I was there, and then cleared a near a limb, or Millie Rhine, as my brain insisted on reading this backwards for some reason whenever I saw it. Radon is the final boss, if you didn't know. Spoiler warning was a while ago, to be fair, which made my choice of armor for this playthrough unintentionally very amusing to me. The crowd goes mild about this being a returning boss from the base game, though, or at least I hope it does. Or maybe the crowd is going wild because there's nothing more Elden Ring than reusing unique event status fights from the base game, right? Everyone seemed to love that. As I said earlier, I spent 5 hours fighting this guy before seeing victory, even though I had reached Scatman 19 with a set of fragments from the last area. That's a pretty big bump in fight duration.
This is one thing that I just now realized is he's been upgrading his Ash stuff like as he's gone through the DLC, and yet stated he did not use any ashes during this DLC. So it makes me wonder, like, does he like this is the one thing that I've found with games like this is when people ask about like there's different sort of sub communities in terms of people in the ways they play these games, right? You have the people that are willing to use summons, and so they do. You have people that are willing to use summons at certain times, right? For bosses that they think they will need help with. Then you've got people that don't do summons at all, and this game probably pushes that to its natural sort of end point, just because this game buffs the crap out of you and your summons, but the bosses still beat the crap out of you anyway. And so I wonder what it would have been like if he went through this DLC with summons, because I'm very curious of that. And I'm also curious if summons affect the difficulty in any way, because a lot of the damage numbers he's cranking out were not consistent with my playthrough of the games, with a glass cannon build similar to his own, where it has two huge weapons that I'm slapping the crap out of enemies with. So I wonder if the damage numbers are actually reduced if you summon, because I've been seeing his playthrough where he does a lot of damage without summons, and I'm wondering if this game is a similar system to Dark Souls 2, where summoning increases the defenses of the bosses for some reason, because just some of the damage numbers he's throwing out here just seem inconsistent to me. Unless there's like a third party mechanic, like with the ashes being a thing. And also, just this DLC is sends very mixed messages, because half the time you won't be able to summon a summon because the boss doesn't give you enough room to summon, or you have to put yourself in harm's way to summon something that will probably get killed halfway through the fight because of all the AoE spam across all the different boss fights. So, yeah, there are some issues. We'll probably go over that later.
Even Bale was a baby in comparison after this, dying in under 10 minutes, but remember, I had over an hour of attempts from earlier in the run that taught me a lot, so he still comfortably comes in second place for attempt numbers. He's in first place for my favorite of the expansion, though, and in my heart. Good job on getting that if you guessed correctly earlier. That was my run of the
That's a very different. I got a very different boss tier list. But let's see. He's getting to the world design now, so let's see what he has to say about all the Skippy fragments everywhere.
DLC, and happily, all the major talking points I want to go through can be found in that summary. Nice that, almost like I planned it. Because I didn't. The two biggest problems I think FromSoft were facing when making this expansion were player progression and making an addition to the open world formats. DLC for Dark Souls and the like has traditionally been a few more levels with a few more bosses. More of the same structure delivered at the same rhythm from the game's foundation. I suppose they could have done the same here for Elden Ring, but it wouldn't fit as well with the open world players would be coming from. Conversely, creating a second map that would be large enough to feel like you can get lost and explore, which is an important part of open world maps in my opinion, but still not balloon in size and outrun the scope into becoming a sequel instead of a DLC, would be a balancing act to maintain throughout development. And as we can see with the problems present in the game today, it was a difficult one to perform. Let's rewind for a second though. The answer to this problem is what we got, a mix of both. Technically, the Shadow Realm is an open world map, but to me it also feels like one huge open air Souls level. The legacy dungeon sections are more
I gotta go back. I gotta go back.
of both. Technically, the Shadow Realm is an open world map, but to me it also feels like one huge open air Souls level.
One huge open air Souls level. You mean like an open world map? it's, it's that thing where he's using words combined that sound exactly like other words he's used, but he's drawing a difference between them that I don't understand. Like, come on.
The legacy dungeon sections are more focused wings of this map, like dungeons within a dungeon, instead of the game's more sprawling and straightforward layout. It's a little more Zelda than base Elden Ring, and honestly is pretty damn close to how I envisioned the original game being. In my first video, I spoke about how I collected a handful of questions as I explored the game about unreachable locations, and wondering about them kept simmering as I made progress, like getting up to this big plateau in the southern part of Liurnia. You can't get there until way later in the game. In fact, I actually had given up on being able to get there and thought it was just decorative in the distance, but then Elden Ring was full of surprises. The DLC goes ham on that idea, with main content being gated behind engaging with thinking about how to get around, which routes go where, and possible bridging connections on the map, instead of it being for mostly optional content in vanilla Elden Ring. This is probably my favorite thing in the DLC. It's either that or the boss roster of way more hits than misses. That's more of an enjoyable.
Way more hits than misses. Oh, we're going to disagree on that, Joseph. We're going to disagree on that. Yeah. See, Vangeris for winding your point is indicative of you yapping. I mean, you're free to yap. I think my main thing is like what's in the yapping that matters.
It's either that or the boss roster of way more hits than misses. That's more of an enjoyable return to From for me though, whereas this map design is something novel and interesting. I think it was a huge success in structure and rewarding the player with eureka moments, while also allowing the map to feel more substantial when it's quite a bit smaller than the lands between. It's a dense dungeon island versus the loosely interconnected continents. It gave me way more to think about and mentally work with instead of it acting as a hub for content. That's not to say that the base game is devoid of this. To be clear, some of the best parts have this same quality, just that it's at a higher concentration in the DLC.
That's something I would agree with, is the DLC is sort of a more compact version of the Lands Between, in that there's more stuff to deal with in the Lands Between that are more closely sort of knit, as opposed to, or there's more stuff that's closely put together in the DLC than the base game. It's probably the way I should word it. There's the one problem that I've found with base game Elden Ring is that there's a lot of areas where you just kind of go from A to B, and there's not a whole lot in between that's like meaningful. It's like, yeah, there might be enemies, but there's not a lot in between A and B, like in terms of content beyond like checkpoints and like a couple basic enemies here and there. But the DLC definitely does crank that up with a lot more sort of like either boss fights or important stuff to loot for protecting yourself against the DLC stuff. So it definitely does a mixed sort of thing with the world design, as well as sort of condensing the content while still making it feel open. So I will give that to the DLC. It does do a good job of condensing as much content as it can into a believable world that also lets us deal with the threats that matter, like bosses and stuff like that, as opposed to just little shits everywhere.
But then we have to speak about that content. First up, those scatter fragments. How do you give players a way to continue leveling up when the majority of them will have endgame characters hitting the soft caps on many stats, have finished their builds, and therefore see runes as mostly worthless?
That is a huge assumption on your part, Joseph. That is a huge assumption that players will not give a shit about leveling up any other stats than the ones that are already on their build, right? I mean, like that is I feel like I know where this is going. I feel like he's viewing this as the Shadow Realm blessings are a new way to level up, which they technically are. But I feel like he's gonna disparage the basic RPG elements of the game in order to make that point. And I would say that while the Tree stuff and just the Shadow Realm blessings in general, while those do give you a new way to level up, they are remarkably restrictive in the way you do level them up, right? Whereas with just general rune progression, it allows you to unlock new things. It allows you to unlock new abilities that you may not have used on your build, but maybe now you can. And I mean, like, given some of the requirements for some of the spells in this DLC, I mean, you kind of need those levels, like what is it? Ralana's Moondrop spell. I think it requires some absurd amount of intelligence. Like, doesn't it require like 73 intelligence or something? It's way up there, right? And if you're level like 60 by the time you get to Ralana, or like 180, like that's almost half of your levels are dedicated just to that, to get that up, right? Well, and you're probably another third are probably, for health. right? Then the whatever's left over goes into like stamina and FP, right? It's that thing where like levels still matter in a game with RPG elements where you unlock things based on your skill levels, right? Just I feel like he's gonna disparage the base game because he had problems with the base game because he likes the DLC thing with the Shadow Realm blessings because he likes the DLC and how the Shadow Realm blessings act as a pseudo level up system for this DLC in general. But I mean, I'd go a step I'd go a step in a different direction and say that the Shadow Realm blessings are arbitrary because they only work within the Shadow Realm. So all of those blessings that you spend so much time looking for and searching for and using will become useless in the base game. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with the DLC is that a lot of the stuff in the DLC that helps you deal with the difficulty is not transferable, and I think that's a big problem. Like DLC stuff in the previous games, they had gear, they gave you runes, or they gave you like souls or echoes or whatever, and those got you stats that you could use permanently. It's not this temporary shit where you can only use it in the DLC. It is arbitrarily restrictive. And personally, I'd rather just forget the Skippy Tree blessings, rebalance the bosses, and just continue leveling up. Right? Leveling up works. It continues to boost the things you already do. It continues to open up your options for things that you already do, and it doesn't limit things based on just how many of a certain like piece of trash you find on the ground like is, right? And that's my biggest problem with these Shadow Realm blessings compared to just leveling up in general. Is leveling up in general unlocks something for every type of build depending on what you level up. The Shadow Realm blessings are just arbitrary number crunches that help you in one way or another, either deal a little bit more damage or reduce a little bit of damage, or increases the health and damage of your summons, right? It's a very basic number crunching that doesn't need to be there when we could have had RPG elements take the focus again and have it where we could unlock new abilities with higher requirements that we can use the levels that we get in the DLC to unlock. It's very simple RPG mechanics, right? Very simple RPG mechanics. And the Shadow Realm blessings, like the Skippy fragments and the ashes, just take away the RPG elements of it because we all use those, we all get them, and we all desperately want more to deal with some of the bullshit in the game. Anyway, I need to catch up on chat. I think it requires 70, but the spell is hot garbage. It's a long windup for a lot of damage, but a lot of enemies don't give you an opening to use it unless you're willing to waste it on a bunch of weak enemies. I think they were afraid of players being too OP at high levels, but the thing is, stats have hard caps. You're not getting infinite damage. Yeah, that's another thing. I don't mean to be rude, but I think they over prepared for max level. It's convenient for switching stuff around without respecs. Let's see, but it's not as overpowered as the devs think it is. Yeah, I mean, again, like I think that the other DLCs had a better grasp on how to add stuff to the game that allows the player to sort of end game plus, not new game plus, but like end game plus. Like DLC stuff was typically sort of you no longer are building your weapons anymore. So instead of focusing on like upgrade materials and stuff like that, now you focus on just giving them new weapons and new stuff that they can unlock if they have the stats or don't have the stats for it. And again, it's just the Shadow Realm blessings are just an arbitrary number crunching in the player's favor. They don't actually unlock anything like RPG elements with the leveling up system do. And that's my ultimate biggest problem with what he's probably about to say. Again, I'm just assuming he made a comment talking about the leveling up system and how the Shadow Realm blessings kind of like are a better version of that when I can only see them as restrictive, especially by comparison to the base game, considering you can't take the Shadow Realm blessings out of the DLC. So essentially, you find those things. You find something useful in the DLC that only works in the DLC, so it is useless in the rest of the game. Now, New Game Plus, I don't know if they carry over. I would assume they would, like seeds, but if they don't, then holy shit. Still not brought myself to playing the DLC. Base game is tough enough with the gank. I mean, at this point, I'd say if you don't enjoy the ganking and the damage and the difficulty of Elden Ring, base Elden Ring, don't get the DLC. I think in terms of content, it's worth the price, but if you don't like the base game problems, then you're going to have a harder time with the DLC. In the DLC, since you already had your build, you could branch out and try out the new weapons with little restriction. That's fun. Yeah, that's the thing I would agree with. I almost don't want to recommend it, but if you catch it on a good deal, go for it. That's true. Like if Steam has like a 50% off deal, it's probably worth it. But to me, it's not worth the frustration of dealing with some of the stuff in the DLC because there's a lot of genuinely just frustrating design choices in the DLC in general. But anyway, let's get back to him talking about the world design stuff.
Enter a new layer of character progression. Find these items, use them at a grace site, and get stronger on top of whatever power you've came into the DLC with. Both damage and defense scale up with the same fragments, and spirit summons become stronger with revered ashes. So does Torrent apparently, but it never felt like it to me since getting comboed off the horse is the only thing that matters, and I don't think the revered ashes helped with that at all, but maybe I just suck. These two items
I don't think that's you just sucking. I think Torrent just as a mount sucks. Like Torrent really does suck in this in this game and its DLC. Torrent is weak as fuck, right? Torrent has no poise, and getting stun locked off of him usually ends up getting you comboed by another enemy that probably knocked you off in the first place. It is. I wish that the DLC did something with Torrent. Like I genuinely wish that they did something different with Torrent, like gave him armor or gave him some kind of increased poise or something. It seems like he just takes the same damage he always does and always gets knocked out of existence, and then we get fucked because of it because our character takes 5 minutes to recover from it. Mounted combat in general sucks in this game, both DLC and base game. I'm just going to say that now. Mounted combat in general sucks. It is extremely tedious, extremely one note, and it does not offer anything new the further you get into the actual experience of the game. Nothing develops. It's the same shit over and over and over and over and over, where you just slowly slap an enemy down with your 3-hit combo or whatever you have based on your weapon, and then it just, and usually what happens is you'll do really well, then you'll get knocked off your mount, and then you'll get combo stomped on the ground while you're trying to recover. Because the recovery time from Torrent getting knocked out from under you is way too long. It's way too long given all the combos of enemies, all the attacks of bosses, and all the other shit that you have to deal with in the game. I'm going to rant so much when I get to my Elden Ring video. I swear. That's a good point as well. If you don't like base Elden Ring's late game scaling, ganks, overly delayed attacks, the DLC might not be for you. Yes. I hate to say it, but they double down on every single one of the base Elden Ring's flaws. They don't learn from a single mistake. Shadow is just more Elden Ring. Yeah, I mean, it really is just Elden Ring plus, but it's just more of the same problems, like we said.
are very similar to golden seeds and sacred tears for your flask in vanilla. They are similarly usually placed in
Wait a minute. Let's go back.
With that at all, but maybe I just suck. These two items are very similar to golden seeds and sacred tears for your flask in vanilla. They are
I'd say they're similar in the way you find them and upgrade them, but they are not similar in function, right? Like the flasks increase and give you more resources to do more things with in general, right? This is the one thing where he's sort of taking the mechanical way they are given to the player and how they're upgraded and ignoring the fact that they do very fundamentally different things. The Shadow Realm blessings just augment numbers in the player's favor. That is all they do. They just make your defenses a little higher. They just make your offense a little higher. They just make your summon a little beefier. They just make your summon a little bit more damaging. That's all they do, right? I have never read anything on any of the wiki pages I've looked into about them, them doing anything else. All they do is arbitrarily change the numbers in the player's favor. Whereas with seeds and with the physic, with all the different things in there, those things can radically change the way your build functions and what you choose to do, because the seeds deal with how much healing you get, as well as how many spells you can cast before you need to recharge, right? So those things already impact things in a more mechanically varied way than these Skippy Tree things do, right? It's already more dimensional. It's already has different functions depending on what your build is and how you choose to use your build. And then on top of that, you have like the physic affecting different things as well, which I found a lot of the physic rewards in this particular DLC to be utter shit, right? A lot of them are just summon buffs. And they don't really do anything. Again, it's that thing where you're going to give me a physic that boosts my summons like health or lets me heal them when they're probably going to get combo AoE'd by enemies all over the damn place. It's like you're just throwing elements in because you need to have elements in and not thinking about how functionally useful they're going to be in the long run playing throughout the game. Anyway, that was a long rant. I've got so many rants I've got to get out. There's just so much in my system I need to get rid of. All right, let me get back to this.
Are similarly usually placed in ostentatious locations like they've been enshrined, but for the fragments especially, you can sometimes find them in more mundane places, or being carried by shadow dudes of no renown holding glowing pots, which is how I collected a few without even realizing. And I really don't feel like they should have done that, but more on that in a little bit. There are 50 Tree fragments to find, with the max level of the bonus being 20, so you very quickly need more than one for each level up of this Shadow Realm blessing. The strength of this has already been increased in a patch, so instead of giving solid numbers that might be out of date by the time you hear this, I'll just say it's about double damage dealt and half damage received at max level compared to no blessing at all. There are only 25 revered ashes to find for a cap of 10 blessings, but at maximum, the buff it provides is comparable in power for your summons. That means there are 75 of these pickups to find in the DLC. How many lootables do you think there are in total, though? Now, obviously, I can't go through and count them all to make a comparison. Exactly, I can't. So we'll just have to agree that it's a small fraction of the total things that you can find. There are quite a few new weapons and armor sets, but most of these will not be applicable to most builds, which means we have the first bit of returning criticism from the base game that applies to the DLC. Exploration rewards. I think this is the most disappointing aspect of the DLC, and it isn't just about items and character progression. The worst parts of Shadow of the Erdtree feel like the very best parts of Starfield, which is a comparison no one wants to hear. Empty locations and vacant stretches of land that commit the crime of teasing that they will be far more interesting than they end up being.
What experience led you to that belief?
Let's go in order here. Items fare the best out of these issues. Weapons and armor sets and talismans are fairly common, and even though they don't always have universal appeal, they're still more fun to find than low-level smithing stones and the like. They have the potential.
That's one thing I will agree upon. Like, there's a lot of different stuff that you can use for armor and weapons and talismans and stuff, but the random low-level upgrade materials around just confuse me. It's like, why are you placing these in a DLC that is pretty much demanded that we like come to after we beat the majority of the base game, when we should have access to most smithing materials already? Like, why give us these tiny smithing materials? It just seems really odd. It's just really odd. Hard agree. The areas are so damn beautiful, yet you will walk out with a single fragment, a reused boss, and maybe a furnace golem the Mayo. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a lot of the rewards are just not worth the trouble to get them in the DLC. That's a big problem, especially with the golems. The golems are such a tedious fight across every build that there's like the best golem fights are the ones where you use the pots against them and it kills them in like 4 hits or whatever. Those are the best versions of those fights, and even then, those are still tedious because you need to find the materials to craft those things, which are rare. And then you have to make sure that you don't fuck it up and die to one of their huge attack combos that deals ridiculous amounts of damage. And on top of that, their rewards are usually something that buffs your summons or buffs friends or something. It's not something that you intrinsically can use just for yourself in a useful and unique way. Just the golems suck. There's so much stuff in these games that suck. I'm noticing that the more we talk about it. The golems are so boring. I thought it would be a singular boss, but boy, I had no idea how boring it would be. Yeah, especially when they just use the same attacks over and over and over. I mean, even with upgraded Skippy Tree blessings, you still run into the problem of having them take so many hits to bring them down, where you can do a critical attack that does most of the damage you're going to deal with to them. It's like it takes the player so damn long to break them down, and you usually have to do it more than once, right? I think you have to do it more than once. I've never seen any gear setup that lets you do it in a single critical hit, But it's still just one of those things where it's like, why have you made combat so tedious from? Like, why have you made it so boring to fight these enemies? And then you add the lackluster rewards on top of that, and it's just like, I started to ignore them as my playthroughs went through, just because I did not care to fight them. I got so sick and tired of fighting these big fiery dudes that waste 10 minutes of my life. It's like, geez.
Potential for unlocking new builds for future runs or tempt you into making a change for the DLC. Outside of that, though, and where the findables bleed to character progression, is a missed opportunity for a new type of upgrade, an alternative progression path which, at an extreme end, could be like a much more in-depth and much more powerful Wondrous Physic Flask that I could ignore and then complain about my own choice for not using. But no, seriously, a new tier of weapon upgrades would have been great here, and a new level of Crimson Flask upgrades would have worked too. Maybe there were worries about PvP balancing or that a spike in player power would ruin the end fights of the base game, but they're bad already, and I think there could have been ways to mitigate that concern by putting limitations on the power buffs like the Scadu fragments work today. They only function in the Shadow DLC realm. It's a bit
All right, so this is one thing where I think I kind of agree with his assessment of the problems in the game, but at the same time, I don't think that I don't think that the solution is Scattertree fragment stuff that is limited to the DLC. I think part of the problem with having upgrades in any game is that you eventually reach a point where you can't upgrade anymore, and if you put content afterwards that doesn't deal with upgrades at all, then you run into the issue of not having anything else to upgrade, right? Which I think on the face of it is okay, because we don't have to upgrade things the entire time we're playing the game. We can just have a weapon that works and we just upgrade it and then we just use it more often. Like having a lack of upgrades after you beat the base game and the DLC not having any upgrades beyond that doesn't necessarily take away anything from the experience, right? And I mean, personally, again, coming back to the RPG elements of it, the RPG elements are what you use to upgrade your weapons efficiency. If you want to increase your spell damage, you increase your intelligence. If you want to increase your physical damage, you increase your dex or strength. You want to increase your arcane or faith damage, then you increase, your arcane or the faith stuff. Like the RPG element is the root of how these problems are solved in the other games in terms of upgrading your damage output. Arbitrarily adding another system on top of upgrades doesn't do as much as leveling up, period. Right? Leveling up, period, is simple, universal, because it affects the base game content and the DLC content at the same time, and also doesn't restrict anything like the Skippy Tree fragments do, where they only work in the DLC, where your damage gets radically changed, and then when you go back to the base game, you're probably going to find that you do a lot less damage than you remember. Right? And it's one of those things where it's just like it's one of those things where they could have upgraded things in a different way. And one thing that I mentioned, I think, in one of my Elden Ring videos when I was playing the game was, wouldn't it be cool if we could upgrade our flasks in New Game Plus, right? Like increase increase the number of flasks we could have, or the number of health they give on New Game Plus, stuff like that. Like I think that's just take the system you already have and in New Game Plus allow it to increase again, right? I think that'd be fun. Would it make things a little bit overpowered? Sure, but there are ways that you could balance it, to make it interesting and useful, in later cycles. Now, for DLCs that take place after the main game, I think that it's fine to just not worry about upgrades and just give players new weapons and things like that. I don't think we need a totally new system of progression added just for the sake of progressions, like mechanics, right? Like, give me good content, give me good bosses, give me good environments. That will suffice. That will be enough, right? I don't care if we have new upgrade materials that take our weapon to plus 28 or plus 31 or plus 15, right? I don't care about that shit. I want good content. I want to engage with the world. I want to engage with the bosses. I don't care if my weapon gets a new set of upgrades based on some arbitrarily created new structure that increases the damage of it. I'd rather you just make good bosses and good areas with interesting encounters that I can deal with. That's all I care about. I just want good content. I don't want all these extra layers trying to be interesting and intricate when they do the opposite. They're just simple number crunches. That's it.
clunky, but if you're already in Clunky Town, then just kind of go crazy with it and build some more. At the very least, there should have been a new upgrade stone that allows you to improve any weapon in one shot from whatever level it is to level 25, or 10 if it's a somber version, as a cool new thing to find that also alleviates a lot of busy work in getting another weapon up to snuff. Some of these suggestions.
I mean, again, this is one of those things where I don't understand where he's coming from with this argument of I just want I want a fast track way to upgrade my weapon. It's like, why though? Like I can understand efficiency, but when you create a fast track auto upgrade to max level, that's blatantly overpowered, right? And that radically imbalances things if people get to the DLC and then grab that and then pick a game, something from the base game, and then just auto upgrade it to max, right? And it also becomes a problem if you take that philosophy and only keep it in the DLC, where only DLC weapons get maxed out. It's like, it's like again, he's like finding all these weird quote unquote solutions to problems that don't have to exist in the first place. Let's not find solutions to problems that don't exist. Let's deal with the problems that we have now, and avoid doing them in the future. You don't mean that, Vangaris. You want more smithing stone 6s in your chests. Yes, I want to have my inventory stuffed full of smithing stone, insert number here. I just want my entire inventory full of them. That is truly the bestest of things we could do.
Suggestions could have also been a part of breaking the endgame power boost of the Scadu fragments into smaller chunks. Like I said, the current ultimate bonus is about double damage, and I think it would have been better if a new tier of weapon upgrades and the Scadu boost still resulted in about that level of power. To reiterate, in this imagined different progression system, you would upgrade your weapon to level 40, say, with DLC stones, and when that's capped and you found all the Scadu clumps, you would still have roughly the same power output as you do in-game today with just the blessings. Just so there's more stuff to find in the world and you get to improve your weapons some more as well as your character, because right now there's just not enough of that in the DLC IMO. Personally, I would have preferred findable stat increases to unlock more build options and the like.
Wait, what was that last thing you said? What was that last thing you just said?
Personally, I would have preferred findable stat increases to unlock more build options and the
Findable stat increases. You mean like leveling up, you dipshit? That's what leveling up does. What the fuck? I'm in an RPG where killing any enemy gives me something that helps me level up, but I want to find something that helps me level up. That's not that. It's like, are you fucking stupid? I feel like this is just a thing where he wants something that's niche, right? He wants a niche system for leveling up, not the traditional way of leveling up from the base game or from the other games, right? That's what I feel like is he's trying to get across, but he can't say that because it sounds retarded, right? Like, why would you want an art? Why would you want a niche system for leveling up when we already have a system for leveling up and we already have items that boost your levels up to certain amounts? Like, we already have talismans you can wear and gear you can wear that increases certain stats certain amounts, right? Like, what do you fucking like, what do you want, Joseph? Like, you want stuff that's already in the game, but you don't want it the way it's already in the game. It's like the problem's not the thing that you want, the problem is the way that you want it delivered to you. It's like, this is why it's frustrating to cover his content. It's like, why do you want this stuff? Surely he doesn't mean more talisman that boost stats because they lose purpose in the base game once you level enough. I mean, that's also a problem. This is, again, leveling up is a thing. Why? Why?
the like. Scadu fragment of endurance for 1 free point, Scadu fragment of dex, and so on. Maybe these even push the soft cap up so you can still improve your character in the stats that you like at the same time. And there could have been a lot of these to find because there are a lot of stats, and it would always feel like a little bit of cool incremental progress when you find them. But it seems like that suggestion wasn't well received from the first video, or at least didn't hit people as exciting enough. Who knows though, maybe people need to feel it to understand what it would do. One thing I feel way more strongly about, however, is that there could have been far more fragments to find, but this could be coming from a place of disappointment from my first run, something I think most players will share, which was that hoping that every lootable they found was the one thing worth finding and then being let down when it wasn't.
Yeah, this is one significant problem with Elden Ring and the DLC in general, is that having certain items have the same sort of color variation, like the item you just picked up, and it's just a blessed bone shard instead of like an actual useful thing. that shit gets so old, right? Like that shit is so annoying when it's color coded and you think it's something amazing and it turns out to be a fucking leaf, right, or a flower. It's like, come on, why? Like the game just taunts you with some of the loot.
Instead, this place is Gordon Ramsay's worst nightmare, a land where everyone knows how to cook. They could have doubled this number for the same boost in power spread over 40 blessings instead of 20, and I think it would have worked. Honestly, for the first time in my life, I'm trying to be conservative here because I think they could have went full Odyssey Moons with these and had one at the end of every side dungeon as well, but hey, let's not go crazy. My last point about these fragments is that I sorely wish they had been split into two sets, one for attack power and another for survivability. On my second playthrough of the DLC, I returned to my first ever Elden Ring character and switched him back to using a single longsword that I played most of the base game with at release, until making the switch to big weapons near the end when I got annoyed at the boss design. It was a really cool moment on a personal level for me to be able to switch that guy back to my favorite weapon, but we'll get to that a little later. I wanted to see exactly how many of these fragments I could get along with the new two-handed talisman at the start, and which parts of the DLC world were gated behind dungeons and bosses. Turns out, not much is blocked off. In fact, I think you can set up the map to have access to all of the major bosses simultaneously, except for Radon, of course, and knock them down in any order you like. Without entering any legacy dungeons, you can get 22 fragments. If you dip in and explore, but don't kill any bosses, you can get up to 36, which is enough to have the blessing as high as level 15 before you've solid snaked it up and fought any big boss. And this is also with me not looking at any guides for secret routes I might have missed, so it's possibly even easier to do than I think. To be clear, and I know I should make this kind of disclaimer more often, this is not criticism. Knowing the way on a second playthrough, so you're running around robbing banks all whacked up on Scadu snacks, can be a fun, perhaps broken experience, but is doubtful to be your first experience with the content.
Well, this again, this is one thing that I harped on with regarding his video about Elden Ring is it's not about the first playthrough that ultimately matters in the long run. It's about every subsequent run afterwards. Because your first playthrough can be interesting and challenging. The second playthrough is more important based on how you learn to deal with things. Because when you learn to deal with things in different ways, you end up with different strategies that can develop as a result of your knowledge of the game ahead of you, right? That's part of the fun of these games is overcoming the challenges in new ways with different builds or different items or what have you, right? You know the challenge is coming. You know how the challenge functions. You know what the boss can do. You know what the enemies do. You know where the ambushes are. You know where all the stuff is. When you know where all that stuff is, now you have essentially a sandbox functionality where you can take different abilities, different weapons, and just do different crazy shit with it to deal with the problems in different ways, right? And sometimes they're better, sometimes they're worse, but that option is still there on second playthroughs. When you look at everything from a first playthrough perspective, you are inherently going to ruin the game in the long run because you're only worried about shock value. You're only worried about how things appear to be at first. You're not looking at the deep processes of how things will function in later runs. And that's a really, really, really big problem with the way he's sort of talking about this stuff is he's, like the whole bit that he just went over with all the Scatter blessings that you can grind out before you attack any main boss. It's like, who in their right mind is going to go through the entire game only going for the fragments before a boss, right? If you absolutely hate the difficulty of the game, you might do that, right? But in my experience, it's similar to getting the flasks upgraded, right, in the base game. You can unlock several flasks very early on in the game if you just run around, grab a couple keys, and then just run around the map collecting seeds and tears. You can do that if you want, but it's incredibly time consuming to do that, right? It's incredibly time consuming because there are so many things to grab to upgrade your flasks to a certain point. And by the time you've gotten all those things, by the time you get all the upgrades in a certain area, you may as well have just fought through the area and completed it anyway, right? And it's that thing where it's just sort of the way he explains it and the way he demonstrates it and saying it's not a criticism is like, there are so many upgrades in Elden Ring that you can just find existing, but you have to travel there. And travel time takes a bit, especially when you're going out of your way to start up a new character and you want to have all the flasks available. You're going to get out of the grave site or whatever, or the little crypt that you come out of in the beginning of Elden Ring. Right. And then you've got you've got what is it? Like you've got 2 tiers in Southern Peninsula. Let's see. No, I think it's 3 tiers. Yeah, there's 3 tiers in the Southern Peninsula, and there's I think off the top of my head, I think there's 1 seed down there. In Limgrave, there's technically 4 if you count the NPCs that drop them, such as Roderica and the Kenneth Hart, And so like those things will get you a couple of upgrades to help you deal with things, but you can go to Caelid and Liurnia and Altus and Mount Gelmir to get other upgrades, right? But you got to travel through all those areas to get all that stuff, right? And that becomes tedious on repeat playthroughs if you want to set up your character like that, right? Whereas in the other games, you can upgrade things in different ways, right? Like this is one thing that I do think that Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 do well is that you slowly upgrade your Estus flask as you go along, and a lot of those flasks are locked behind certain bosses that you have to defeat for progression's sake, or because the flasks themselves are in an area that is behind a boss, right? Like those options help the progression as you go through the game. Whereas in Elden Ring, you can slowly unlock things, or you can take a long time to just get all your stuff together to be overpowered from the beginning. And while I'm not against people having the option to get overpowered stuff from the beginning, on repeat playthroughs, it's really boring when you spend an hour setting up your character, grabbing all the upgrade stuff that you can get before you actually fight any major boss. It's just a lot of you spend a lot of time doing stuff when you might have been better off just to play the game normally anyway.
So it's a choice. But as I use these fragments, I desperately wish that I could have just applied the damage reduction to make fights easier in a way that made them more forgiving to learn and not accidentally blow my damage potential to the moon and burst everything down. Turns out my weapon for this run made that okay, but with the double colossal build, that was a lot of damage toward the end. I don't see a real downside here because it provides greater player choice and agency in character progression and allows the amount of fragments to find to be literally doubled, since there would be the offensive and defensive variants. Who knows, maybe it would have allowed the defensive side of the buff to go even higher, since boss damage can still hit real hard at the end, even with heavy armor on. My other worry is
This is the one thing that I think what would have helped give him what he wanted without making things imbalanced is, I think instead of having the Skippy tree fragments around that boost your damage so much, I think that what the devs should have done, if they wanted to have this new system to help players sort of get stats up, but without making it an arbitrary number crunch, I think what they should have done is just had little fragments here and there, and you can use the Skippy fragments to level up for free. I think that would go a ways towards giving Joseph what he wanted while still maintaining balance between leveling up as well as allowing us to keep something that we can use outside the Shadow Realm, right? I think that would have been a sort of not the best solution, but off the top of my head, I think that would be a solution that would let us increase our offenses, increase our offensive abilities, increase our defensive abilities, and would allow us, a quick and easy way to do those things without having to farm a bunch of materials around the world to upgrade said thing, right? Because again, just when the DLC damage numbers are so different from the base game, and then you return to the base game, it's like you're playing 2 separate games, right? With 2 separate scaling systems because of the Scattertree fragment stuff. It's one of those things that differentiates the DLC so much in the base game that this may as well just be a sequel with different mechanics.
how do you handle this on those subsequent playthroughs? It's very straightforward to collect all these, and it's not like boring time-invested grinding since you just go and pick them up.
It's not boring time invested grinding. This is boring time invested grinding. The grinding is not actually fighting an enemy to get the stuff. It's running over to grab the thing when they're spread out across the entire map. That's the grindy part, is that you have to go from A to B to C to D to E to F to get all these fragments, to do your thing. That's the
Takes minutes, not hours. It's like the trek down to Weeping Peninsula for the Sacred Tears and getting golden seeds in the open world, really. Imagine being able to go down there in the base game and then returning to Limgrave at level 120 or something. That's kind of what these fragments can do. It could turn into busy work at the start of runs or a test of willpower to keep yourself from exploring into a big bump in power, but also, is it? I don't know how to judge the balancing here, and I wonder if having more fragments all over the island would have made it easier to just go in whatever direction you like, zone by zone, and know you're getting a pretty even increase with each one. It still is a player decision ultimately, but it might be a difficult one to judge what's best. I also realize I'm kind of just describing a basic leveling system here, so I don't know. On that note, really though,
It's like, I know what I'm describing is basically something that's already existed, but I don't know. It's like, dude, it's like you want a leveling system that's not the leveling system we already have, but you want it to have the same functionality as the leveling system we already have. Please take a moment to think about what you're saying in terms of how it actually functions versus what we have, because you might be surprised. Maybe the leveling system is for you. You just have to embrace it. Me doing 11,000 damage in the DLC only to deal 2k damage in the base game. Yeah, it's just that thing where it may as well just be a different game.
this is a cursed problem and I'm wasting my time talking about it because I'm trying to stay focused on changes that are easier to imagine and implement. In reality, this needed a ton more time and attention from the developers and some big exciting shakeups. And maybe this should have been a separate game mode, or maybe the fragments shouldn't have existed at all and this should have grown into a full sequel. Because
Hey, guess what I just said? Guess what I just said?
these two problems are the minor ones in comparison to the world just having so much damn nothing in it, and I am really curious how this happens. On the one hand, I highly doubt FromSoft was happy with a bunch of the side attractions they had in the base game, like the stupid turtle hunts, the Korok beetle puzzles, and the copy and pasted ruins. Apart from a couple of those beetles, these aren't back really, but there's nothing to replace them. Similarly, I criticized the ending of the game for reusing enemies too much, and for the final trek in the mountains, suggested that having straight up nothing there would have been an improvement for the mood and gameplay pacing compared to what they went with. The key part there, though, is what they went with. Unique, well thought out encounters with fresh enemies would have been preferable. With the DLC having so many stretches of actual nothing, I wonder if they had even more recycling at first and then took it out, or if new content just couldn't be made in time.
That's one thing I do wonder about too. Is in both the DLC and the base game, there is a remarkable amount of either nothing or nothing new, or nothing different, and that is a problem across the entire game. There are certain expanses in the game, both in the DLC and the base game, where there's just a void of nothing new to engage you. It's just enemy you've already seen, but their numbers have been scaled, or there's no enemy at all. And so that is a significant problem for this game and DLC, which is a problem for a lot of open world games, right? Because if you stuff the area with too many enemies, then you can run into an issue of like constantly having to fight for every inch that you progress one direction or the other, and that can become a problem. But in a game like this, you could at least put like something, instead of just big forest with wildlife in it and no real reward. Just forest with animals, little animals.
Or the third option, they couldn't get it to run well enough. This is a much more layered map with more overlapping routes and intricate pathing. It could be that it was a performance problem on consoles or even on PC. Todd knows the game isn't lacking those already, but my best guess is that this world was so difficult and took so long to develop that they ran out of time to properly fill it with stuff to do. Take, for example, that the expansion still manages to have so many moments of stunning beauty that you suddenly come across as you exit a cave, or follow a turn, or emerge from a building. From loves these scenic blasts, and so do I. So imagine how carefully the world had to be constructed through planning and editing to allow them to happen, while also providing so much freedom in how the player gets around and explores, while also having interconnected routes going from zone to zone, or wing to wing if you subscribe to the idea that the island is more like a big dungeon than a hub world. All the while, these introductions have to be carefully and naturally hidden from the player's view so they still get the perfect shot with the title card as an introduction. Cerulean and Charos is one of the most beautiful double zones that From has made. It had a really enticing, infectious aura when I arrived there, going from the whiplash of repulsion from the mammoth dragon carcass to the alluring beauty of the contrasting flower fields. It felt like a reprieve from the rest of the DLC's mood so far, tucked away as far from the dying tree on the skyline as possible, and made me feel like I was back at the Fountainhead Palace in Sekiro. It was serene in that way. Yet this place is now that's what I call Elden Ring and crammed with the base game's greatest shits with little else. Another dragon fight, another mariner fight, another deathbird, demi-human queen, oh look a lobster, and there are the annoying hand enemies right next door. I'm not opposed to the game reusing these mini bosses since many players will be returning to the game just for this DLC and might have the perspective of, oh yeah, those things. I remember those. Sure, I'll find another one of those. It's like everything is a remembrance boss. But when that's all there is, it becomes a problem for me. I don't know if that joke is staying, and that was really dumb. Unfortunately, this isn't the worst of it because most of the northeastern part of the map frankly feels blatantly unfinished. The area around the church is the most forgettable part of the DLC to me, but that's only because the very last zone up here was so disappointing that I can't forget it. 2 more tree sentinels, another falling star beast, and the second middle finger ruins that go nowhere. This part and the other finger ruins to the south genuinely made me feel like I was playing vanilla World of Warcraft again right at launch and had gotten to one of the zones that didn't have content yet. And some of the bridging paths, when on torrent, reminded me of the downtime in Shadow of the Colossus, avoiding the obvious pun here. It was such a disappointment to find nothing in these ruins. No secret, no underground legacy dungeons, nothing of substance to match the amazing mystique and the questions the visuals of these areas conjure, both when seen in the distance riding around and when viewed on the map.
Yeah, this is one thing. Those finger ruins are remarkably disappointing. You basically spend several minutes running from A to B, trying to dodge enemies with super tracking stun spells that will come to you, grab you, and deal most of your health and damage if it successfully lands, which it may not. And then all you do is run past those enemies over and over and over, trying desperately not to die, so that you can blow into a finger ruin like whistle, and then you warp out of there and you never come back. It's like, what is that from a content perspective? Just like, what is that? It's like there's nothing there of value, right? Besides the reward that you get from the finger ruin blowing into it. Like, but everything leading up to that is just nothing. It's either nothing or it's frustrating, and that's the biggest problem.
Nothing. Now let's couple this issue with how much of the baffling low-level drops you find as hand-placed pickups, not random enemy drops. Even the rune amounts are bad here. I would have loved this if there was a way to play just the DLC fresh with a new character from the title menu, but
I understand where he's going with this, but I think the rune drops are consistent, right? Because they all scale up, right? Like the lowest rune arc, or another rune arc, the lowest like rune that you can pick up in the base game, I think gives, I think it's 200 runes, right? The lowest base in the Shadow of the Erdtree is 500, right? A significant increase, but it's still the weakest one of them all, right? But the top tier ones, they get up pretty high. The rarer ones give you like 80,000, right? Which is a significant boost if you need it, right? But I still understand the problem he's coming from, but I do think it's a little unfair to say that they're the same.
But since that's not in the game, this is purely a negative to me. Even the justification of lesser stones being used to upgrade weapons doesn't fly, considering that you can buy them cheaply at the Round Table store. It's the clearest sign to me of all that they rushed in a panic to fill this world with things to find when they realized it was so empty and didn't have time to work on something else. Even the thing From historically does best, better than anyone, suffers. Enemy variety. There is so much reuse of the grave birds and blood fiends in particular, and not much diversity within enemy palettes at each zone. It was quite a surprise to see so much of the same enemy type spammed in some locations. Even the New World boss, the Furnace Golem, was boring to me by the time I watched a second one fall over. I love the visuals of these, but they are pasted too much around the map for how long they take to kill, and I don't recall anything else that was new trying to fill this field boss type of encounter. let's pump the brakes here. That was 10 or however many minutes of constant criticism. Didn't I say this was my favorite DLC From has made? How can I do this in almost every video? Well, first, I'm the special type of asshole that likes to pick at what they love to make it better. Thoughts and prayers to my children. I genuinely think good criticism is a gift to creatives, and I have benefited so much from it myself in this YouTube video work, streaming, writing, and so much more in my personal life. This isn't just dishing it out, I like to receive it too. And because of that, I know full well that I haven't always provided good criticism to these games. There are some parts in some of my Dark Souls videos in the past that I don't really like anymore. I've been learning as well, and it's a really good thing when you look back at your past self and see shortcomings, because it means you've grown as a person and can see those mistakes now, whereas before you couldn't.
I really hope that he actually has changed from some of his old sort of opinions and stuff like that, because some of his older takes are really stupid. But I have a feeling some of that has not changed at all. The period of time when your character cannot perform any action after getting hit by an attack. Yeah, that's annoying. Well, I found the upgrade mats could be inconsistent from what I've seen in DLC footage in areas. Yeah, it's just I mean, again, it's just there's a lot of stuff in the DLC that is just kind of there to have something there. Like, there's no real thought put into why those things would be there. Like, upgrade materials are probably the most useful thing, but that's only if you need to upgrade something, right? I mean, otherwise you're not going to really use them at all.
But pushing all that aside, this isn't me trying hard to find a flaw or nitpicking the game to a bald scalp. Speaking of bald, picture a man that has been killing it at the gym recently. Great workouts, nailing the diet side, sleeping well, the muscle like Winter, and Arnold is coming. Delectable shoulder work, impeccable chest progress, and arms to make another man try curious. But you know what he's missed week in, week out? His lower body. He has quads, calves, and hams that should be served deep fried at Popeyes. Shadow of the Erdtree is that. It skipped leg day. So while I can admire and enjoy so damn much about all of the greatness in the rest of the DLC, I can't ignore a part of it that does not match up in any sense of the imagination. Just like this envisioned bodybuilder having these really tiny legs with this huge jacked upper body that you could admire big time, but, look down and it's like, hey, dude, what happened? I think this is something some people don't understand about some of my past critiques on great games, and it must certainly be my fault. The incredible successes of them are the reason why the shortcomings are so glaring and sometimes unbelievable to me. It's like Shakespeare missing an opportunity for a pun, or Streamer Joe missing an opportunity to dunk on some weebs. Look, we're about to get into the boss talk, which is more positive than the rest, but I do want to make two final points about the DLC's world. The first is that, despite what I said earlier about its structure, I do think there's a lack of that Legacy Souls feel. Shadowkeep is great, but it's at least a full tier below Stormvale Castle and Lindell if you include the sewers, both of which were the highlights of my base game replay. The flooded section was a pleasant callback to Dark Souls 1, but then paid out very little in interesting exploration or even being an achievement to drain. You kind of do it really fast after getting there, with yet another reused boss as the key feature instead of something new and exciting lurking in the water waiting for you. The side dungeons were less frequent and more substantial, so a big thumbs up from me, but I don't know if they'll still be enjoyable on replays. Belarus was a pleasant introduction, but more so for atmosphere than level design, which is similar to my thoughts for part 2 of this later in Millie Rhine. Bad Romance Ruins was quite cool since it was a dungeon on horseback, and that's new and novel, but spent a bit too much time in the same boxy type of tunnels for my liking. And then we come to Midra's Manse, which had an amazing introduction, and then was teensy tiny. This is related to my second point. The overworld is very interesting, but lacks the surprises of the base game. The unexpected regions to the north, the underground map revelation, the meteoric change after Radon, the secret Sifra connections, and how the game feels like it could go on forever. And look, I get it, it's just a DLC, but it's DLC of more Elden Ring, and there is nothing more that screams Elden Ring than these sections in my mind. The Finger Ruins should have been this, but they weren't, which is why the Abyssal Woods is so relevant, because it's where Shadow of the Erdtree does come close. At some point in
Oh no, where is he going with that Midra's pathway shit? I have a strange feeling he's going to really complement the mechanics of dealing with invincible enemies that trigger you to have frenzy. I feel like he's going to praise that, and I might lose my shit. Metaphorically, of course. Shout out to the DLC for making catacombs worse. I mean, I actually don't think they made the catacombs worse as much as they just made them bigger. And so that kind of like certain parts of them are bad, but overall I don't think they're too bad. But again, it depends on the catacomb. I do really dislike the enemies that shoot the bouncing sort of spell, whatever that is. It's like the little shaving spell that bounces off the walls behind the player, so they can hit the player, go through them, then bounce off the wall and hit them again. And there's enough of them where you can get comboed to death very quickly. I found those really annoying. The Winter Lanterns, man, gotta admire how they stuck in an enemy type that was not enjoyed by anyone. Yep, and I really hope Joe's about. I really hope Joe's not about to praise them because I'm gonna.
In my exploration, I vividly remember thinking that I was seeing an empty area of the map when I looked down at this. Some inaccessible pit for lore reasons, how poetically apt for how I view the story of these games, with decorative foggy treetops that some other YouTuber will speculate on for hours. So getting here was a great surprise, made even better by what I think was a purely intentional misdirect of a side catacombs being the way you access it. The atmosphere is incredible. I love the gameplay jump scare of getting dismounted like a slap out of nowhere, and the twist of Torrent not coming back after that because he's scared, and then the disappointment cascade began. What are these?
Here we go. I think he's actually going to criticize it. Oh, whew, scared me for a second, Joe. He might still scare me. If FromSoft wasn't such a well-received company, you think they would do that? Hell nah. Well, that's the thing. I don't think they would bring. I feel like there is actually. This actually brings up an interesting discussion. I actually do believe that there's an element of sort of Miyazaki's design philosophy where he does want things to be sort of masochistic to a certain degree, and he wants them to be gimmicky masochism, right? Like this area is kind of gimmicky masochism where you do the same thing over and over and over to get through here. There's no way around it. You have to stealth past these guys because if you run, you're going to waste a lot of time getting hurt and probably die and reset. That's a big problem, but he threw it in anyway. And I think he does this and the Lake of Rot just because he knows it will fuck with players. Like I think these are actual troll levels. They are designed to troll players. And I think that's kind of part of the problem with them is they're designed to clearly annoy the player. They are built in a way that does not take advantage of the game's mechanics and instead just forces us to do the same thing over and over.
These tutorial messages doing in a secret endgame area in a DLC? Why is there a forced stealth section with enemies that don't look nearly as scary as the introduction here set up? Why is this it? There's nothing else. Two short, not fun stealth sections and a big empty forest capped off by a small legacy mansion. Then when you're done, you still can't call Torrent to explore it properly because then you'd find out even faster that there's nothing here to see except another 2 goddamn cookbooks that you have to hoof it around on foot to find, and it's not worth it and so drawn out and so tedious. And here I go. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop. The biggest
I mean, there's all the criticisms of that area. It's like the best part about the area is the boss, but outside of the boss, there's nothing else there. There's there's stealth elements. There's some skippy tree fragments in a corner. There's a map. Apart from that, you ain't got shit. It's like, wow. Yeah, and I'd love to not be trolled to this degree. That laser section before Putrescent Night boiled my blood too. It's just like, ooh.
biggest missed opportunity of the
Why?
DLC, in my opinion, because the Northeast Zone and Finger Ruins were so lackluster that I can't even think of what they could have been, was not intertwining the outside forest with a supernaturally huge, twisted, Frenzy Flame-themed mansion castle legacy zone, and I can think of no better fuel than this for a different fire. The DLC isn't finished, probably due to time constraints, and this vapid stealth section was a quick fix to fill up space that needed to be filled. This couldn't stay completely empty like some of the other zones. There is a boss here. There needed to be something on the lead up to it. I wish it was something more, and more as I'm writing this, I wish this had been allowed to grow into a fully priced and fully developed Elden Ring 2, or Elden Ring spin-off. This world design deserved to be finished. And honestly,
This is one thing. I don't think that this would. If this was a sequel, I probably wouldn't pay $60 for it. But I do agree with his criticisms of that area in particular. It is such a nothing burger of an area that there's next to nothing of value in there besides the skippy tree fragments, the map, and the boss. There's nothing else in there that's worth doing. It's just it's so vapid. It's probably the best example of nothing being in a level in this game. It's probably the best example of that, where there's next to nothing to do besides find Skippy fragments and then a map and then a boss and then leave. Like there's nothing. Like there's nothing there. Unrelated question, but in your Skyrim side quest vid, did you cover the Bard's College one? Gave the video a watch, but missed large parts due to real life. Yeah, the Bard's College stuff is in that video. If you go to the oh shit, what's that? What's the map section called for Solitude? I think it's Hjal March off the top of my head, but I might be wrong. But yeah, I did do a lot of the Bard's College content in the side quest video, so that is in there. So just look for the section that deals with stuff in the Solitude hold. I forget the name of the hold off the top of my head now, but it is in there. I forget what timestamp it is, but it's probably near the beginning, I'd say. But it is there. It does exist. But yeah, I think we're about to end this world design section, so let's see how that does.
It still does, but I don't see From going there. Do you? I don't have as many negative things to say about the bosses, which is what we're finally going to speak about next. But first, if you'll forgive the indulgence, I have a feeling some people are going to skip to this section in the video timeline chapters, so give me a second to own them. Wow, so just jumping right here, huh? That's all you care about? Boss opinions or bust? Don't care about any of the context this section might draw from the rest of the video? I see boss in timeline, I get neuron activation. Go back to the start and watch the whole thing. Do not collect 200. In a weird...
Okay, so that's kind of all I can afford to do for today. So part of me kind of wonders if he's being a little bit more spiteful towards the community that's reacting to his videos. Like it seems like he's poking the bear, so to speak, a lot more in this video than he was in the previous one. But that might be me, especially considering I watched that video like I think a month and a half ago at this point. Yeah, we're gonna have to come back to this at some other day because I enjoyed reacting to these. I enjoy reacting to videos, although my voice is getting hoarse and I have to leave. We don't have enough time to finish this, but this is a good thing to come back to later. So we'll see how that does. But yeah, just making it halfway through here. It's been fun, I guess. Hopefully. But yeah. So I'm gonna continue this. We'll react to the next part next Saturday. I don't think I'm doing anything next Saturday. Hope not. But yeah, we're gonna finish this up. I'm about out of stuff to react to, so send me links to things that you think would be fun to react to. I've got the Synthetic Man Elden Ring review to react to, which is about an hour and a half long, as well as this to finish up. So we'll probably got about a month's left of content. Then after that, I don't know. After that, I have nothing left to do. So let me know if you can think of any suggestions for stuff to react to, because I would love to react to new things. Oh, good. You're right with the name. Always felt they were the underloved faction of a sorts you could join. I agree. Like I wish the Bard's College was expanded more. It feels like it should be along the level of like a College of Winterhold type of quest line or something. You know, something a little bit more meaningful. Glad the reactions are back. Be well and see you next time. Same to you. And yeah, so as always, just thank you all for watching. I will see you guys next time, and God bless.